Welcome back. Yes, indeed. We are still on that deferred electricity tariff hike, and we've got Mr. Sonny Iroche joining us via Zoom this morning. He's a former executive director, finance and accounts for the transmission company of Nigeria. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. Well, quite a number of issues have been raised by the senators who we just heard, and then, of course, the public consumers always have their views about this. But given the way this is playing out, I mean, there are those who have described this deferring that planned increase as postponing the evil day. But from your perspective, what do you think, what's your interpretation of how this is playing out?
Thank you very much, Chamberlain. If you recall that on the 27th of May, exactly Children's Day, when I was on this channel, I had cautioned that the hike in electricity bill at this time would be very unwise and untimely, to be so insensitive, particularly considering this COVID-19 pandemic. Well, like we've always said, for the electricity industry to remain solvent, there must be cost-reflective tariff. It is as simple as ABC, because electricity is like any other product. It is like buying a drink, buying a fish, buying whatever commodity it is that you use. You must consider and factor in the cost of production. Those who invested in the electricity assets, that is the generation companies and the distribution companies, are there to make their money and make some profit. They are not asking for too much, but again, they must also provide to the consumer stable, reliable, and efficient power before they can ask for an increment in tariff. But again, it's like a chicken and an egg situation. The discos are by law given by the Nigeria Electricity Regulatory Commission, NEC, that they cannot spend more than $250 million as their capex, their capital expenditure, in more than 5 years, which would be captured in their tariff. Then if that leaves them with about $50 million a year, that can hardly do anything in their equipment sourcing and providing power to Nigerians. Federal government of Nigeria also, in the agreement, the sale agreement of these assets, the unbundled PHCN, have some role to play. They guaranteed to deliver to the discos minimum of 5,000 megawatts of power, which they have failed to do over the years. And so it's just a chicken and an egg situation.
So if I could comment at that point, part of the consideration or what they want to be considered as well is that, yes, much as the tariff, cost-reflective tariff is desirable for the investors, but they also think, look, yes, you can do all of those, but whatever happens to service? Because if we're having to reflect that tariff, we have to pay premium and good attention as well to service delivery, which many say that is a missing component, or we're glossing over that.
Okay, let us look at it holistically. Now, what you and I are paying off-grid are cost-reflective. We buy diesel, we buy petrol, whatever kind of generator that you're using to supply power to your offices or your residences. You are invariably paying a cost-reflective tariff, albeit that it is off-grid and you are the one generating it. Self-generation comes with hazard of sound and air pollution that are very, very hazardous. And now to answer your question directly, yes, there is need for level service agreement between consumers of electricity and the suppliers. Who supplies the distribution companies their power? It is from the Transmission Company of Nigeria, TCN, that evacuates the power that has been generated by the generation companies. Who supplies the generation companies their source of power? It is either hydro or thermal. But a lot of our power generated is generated by thermal, which is gas. And the gas suppliers that have gas supply agreements are also being owed. It is simple. Let everyone in the value chain of power do their own bit as enshrined in the sale agreement, the agreement that governs the privatization of the old PHCN. Federal government, through transmission company, which is the only market participant that is still under the control and purview of the federal government, you deliver minimum of 5,000 megawatts of power to the discos, and let us not give the discos any excuse whatsoever. If you play your own part, you do your own part as
that's the way some may say that's where the challenge is, the conditional clause there. And the analogy you gave about upgrade, because people say, look, that varies. On the one hand, first is that if I get diesel and get the generating set, put all of those things, I know that, look, it is the amount of diesel I have that can sustain until that is exhausted, that service will be provided. So in this case, if we're paying 20,000 naira, for instance, you get your card and you load it with that figure, and some are saying, look, the discos themselves have got to equally let that argument be there as well. If we agree to supply a certain amount and you don't deliver it, what happens at the end of the day? Because I think everybody wants to pay for electricity supply if they can get it. I don't think that's enough. They disagree with that.
By the time the market becomes efficient and everybody plays their role, then we get to the next level of signing an LSA, a level service agreement between, for instance, Mr. Iroche in Lagos and Eko Disco. If perchance, due to their inefficiency or lack of supply, my equipment gets damaged or the food in the freezer gets bad, I should be able to sue. I should be able to demand compensation for the failure of whichever distribution company that it is. But then it should be a chain reaction. The discos should be able to sue TCN for not delivering what they ought to deliver to the letters of the agreement. Nigeria is not operating in a vacuum. I keep saying this. Electricity is being generated, transmitted, and distributed all over the world. I said to someone yesterday, I said, this is a country, the only country that I know of, that I'm aware of, that discusses power, is a disco, genco, gas aggregator, embed. In any part of the world, nobody does that. Just switch on your light and there is light. So, but I think for me, I'm optimistic that with the PPI, with the Siemens AG of Germany, the challenges of transmission and the challenges of distribution should be sorted out if we apply our minds to it.
I mean, we already hear that there might be some issues with installing, when we talk about that deal with Siemens, installing, maintenance and what have you. But, talking about, the Genco aspect, the transmission company and the discos, I've never quite come to understand why we have an installed capacity on one hand of, let's say, 7,500. In fact, sometimes they say they produce like 8,000 and above megawatts. And eventually, when you get to distribution, it's barely 4,000. I've never quite understood why there's always that challenge, installed capacity, the wheeling, and then what is distributed. I know that you've said that this isn't what we should be talking about, segmenting the market, but that is the challenge. What exactly is the issue with that?
Okay, let's talk about it. When most of these generation companies were built by the old NEPA, they had installed capacity that, yes, these plants, for instance, EGMI or any of the GENCOs, they install capacity on delivery, on completion, should be 2,000 megawatts, for example. I'm just using this because hypothetically. And EGMI should have 6 turbines. But for whatever reason, at times, they're only operating on 3 turbines. So the real capacity, generation capacity, is different from what is installed. Right? You understand what I'm saying? It's simple. Each GENCO has an installed capacity that is not what they are capable of generating because of one fault or the other, either a broken turbine or they have to step down because the discos cannot take it, because electricity cannot be stored. Electricity cannot be stored. Once it's generated, it has to go through the entire process of transmission and distribution. If the discos, for whatever reason, whatever challenges they're having, cannot distribute the power that is being evacuated by transmission, then there'll be system failure. The system will fail. Electricity, once generated, must go all through the course to be delivered. Therefore, at times, the control tower in Osogbo, the national control tower in Osogbo, would tell the GENCOs to step down generation because there is a fault somewhere between the line. Either TCN cannot transmit or the discos are rejecting load. So it's an integral problem. So in a nutshell, GENCOs generate, whatever they generate should be evacuated, and whatever is evacuated should be delivered to the discos for distribution to residential and commercial users. If this does not happen in a seamless manner, it will lead to system collapse. You cannot store the electricity anywhere. So installed capacity of generation companies is anything between 10,000 to 11,000 megawatts installed capacity that they can do. But do they do that? No. At times, I hear it runs from anything from 4,000, 5,000 to 6,000, depending on what the transmission lines can take. The transmission line at best has done about 5,300 megawatts, and it doesn't stay for too long. The system will shut down, will collapse. Therefore, the GENCOs must be monitoring the capacity of TCN, and TCN also, if it is okay, if everything is okay on the transmission side, will be monitoring what the discos are doing. So if the discos shut down and reject load, there's nothing you can do about it.
I mean, you've tried to paint a picture, and I can imagine really the mess, if I can use that term, especially because we could do better than this, like you have said. But then, some say insolvency is a challenge of the sector. I recall in 2015, the tariff was increased, for example, and people were hoping that we'll stop rejecting these loads, as you have said, but it didn't get better till 2020. In fact, from the 3,000 megawatts that was being rejected, according to a report by the GENCOs, it grew to almost about 5,000 being rejected. So tariffs were increased, but the rejection still continued in court. So is insolvency really the problem of the sector?
If you sell a product less than your cost of production, you'll go insolvent. It's the same thing with electricity. What should happen is we should bite the bullet once and for all. Much after COVID, not now. What we should have done before COVID came, we did not do. But now people are really under serious financial stress. So to come and add the burden of an increased tariff would not make political and economic sense at all. So we should use this period to make sure we fine-tune everything. Allow the discos to invest as much as they want to invest in capacity building, technical and human capacity, their lines, their transformers, etc. Federal government, as we speak, is the largest single owner of all these discos. They own 40% of these discos. If you allow them to spend what they require to improve their services and then later charge cost-reflective tariff. We keep saying cost-reflective tariff. What is cost-reflective? It is to take total cognizance of the cost that has been put in generating 1 megawatt hour of power to a home. It costs X amount plus a margin of profit that investors who have borrowed monies from banks and who are putting their equity, like any other business, expect to get certain returns that are controlled. It's
Concerning
not just
that tariff, pardon me to jump in, is cost-reflective tariff fixed or is it a moving target?
It should be a moving target, really. If cost of production, for instance, goes down, if the price of gas goes down, it should reflect in the tariff. That's what it means. When the crude oil price went down a couple of weeks ago, the DPR, the Federal Department of Petroleum Resources, had to reduce the pump price of petrol. Same thing applies to electricity.
One of the sectors in the power sector chain is the discos that you've talked about, which of course is the subject of all this tariff increase thing. And as a practitioner, you would know one of the challenges that's been talked about is this metering. I think you referenced it earlier as well. So there's the challenge of revenue collection by the discos. What's the assurance that tariff increase, because there are some who believe in the sector that tariff increase is not going to solve the problem if revenue collection by the discos is not resolved, which is a challenge at this point. How do you see that those two issues playing out against themselves? On the one hand is the challenge of the revenues being collected by the discos, and now we talk about tariff increase. So if tariffs increase, how are we sure that that will solve the problem?
Good question. There are myriads of problems in the power sector. There's not just one problem. They are all interconnected. First, we talk about aggregate technical, commercial, and collection losses, ATC and C. In other climes, it just stops at ATC, aggregate technical, commercial losses. When electricity is moved from point A to point B, there are bound to be natural losses. Those are the technical losses. Then the commercial loss is when it gets to the transformers and people are bypassing their meters and not wanting to pay. That is collection. People don't pay. People bypass meters. People connect power from other people's sources. That is stealing electricity. Electricity theft is so high in Nigeria. It's one of the highest in the world. And our tariff also is one of the lowest, even in Africa. The tariff in Nigeria is one of the lowest. So what to do is, if the discos deploy meters, they will run foul of their agreed capex. That is the capital expenditure in a year. Ideally, Nigerians should be metered. If 80% to 90% of consumers are metered in Nigeria, then the problem will be solved. A bottle of soft drink is measured. A bottle of water, table water, is measured. It has 7 CL, whatever it is. The measure of electricity is 1 megawatt hour, and it costs X amount. It can be done. In some estates in Lagos, for instance, residents are now signing agreements with distribution companies for a minimum of 18 hours of power, and they are paying a premium for it. They prefer paying a premium for grid supply than go into their generator. It comes out cheaper at the end of the day. So, in summary, let the regulators be up and doing with their job and look at what is a fair tariff for electricity in Nigeria. Then after that is done, let us now have level service agreements between we, the users of power, and the suppliers, and see if they will not be up and doing in their responsibility to
it's looking like it's we still have some measure of way to go there, Mr. Richard. But some have also argued in the sector that maybe the whole thing is over centralized. Of course, we know that power sector is under the list where it's only the president or the federal government that can deal with it. Do you see a future or reform where the GenCos, the TransCos, and the DISCos are decentralized within states and regions, so that the states or the regions have control as opposed to the federal government having all the power, so that the problems can be dissipated and the solutions can be dissipated accordingly?
The problem lies with our attitude as a people. Some of the states run schools. Are those schools better than the privately run schools? The answer is no. There are so many things that these so-called regions and states are supposed to do that they don't do. But when it comes to electricity, it's a common thing. It's common to all of us because everyone sees it. Having said that, you cannot move the hydro generation from Shiroro Dam, for instance, or from the Jeba Dam. What you can do is, okay, let us regionalize a transmission. And already as it is, transmission company is in 8 regions in Lagos, in Nigeria. You have the Lagos region, you have the Bauchi region, you have the Enugu region, you have all the regions. What needs to be done is to upgrade the transmission capacity from the current radial system to a loop system. We are still using what can be coterminous with analog instead of the digital form of power until we get away from the radial system and loop all our transmission system, whether you regionalize them or not, or 36 transmission companies in all the 36.
We do have our work cut out for us, because even if we get onto the cost-reflective tariff today, it's not a guarantee that we will have the stable or uninterrupted power supply tomorrow. So that's what this is all coming down to. Well, we do thank you. Well, I'm afraid we need to go, Mr. Roche. Yeah,
okay,
well,
thank you very much,
we'll see how we can keep this conversation going at a later date. Thank you for your time today. Mr. Sonny Roche is a former Executive Director of Finance and Accounts for Transmission Company of Nigeria, TCN.